Wait for it. Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So we're going to let our guest, Mr. Chuck, who writes as Charles E Gannon, introduce himself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Hi, I'm Chuck Gannon. I've been known to write science fiction and other things.
Lots of other things, too. You just don't, I mean, you need a hobby is what it comes down to. Because you just won't commit. You write everything. All right, so he writes a lot of the stuff, and we're going to get into some of the coolest stuff. He's definitely sold me, and he's going to be getting all my money in one little place. So don't spend it all in one place. But before we do that, Jana, as our standing Chief Shenanigator, can you introduce yourself, Miss Co-host?
Hi guys, I'm Jana S Brown. I think most of you have heard from me before, and with Nick and Stabby off doing what they're doing, you're going to hear from me even more because, JR couldn't say no when I said, can I play? So I'm happy to be here. I am a reader of Mr. Gannon's, and I've run into him at several shows, and I find him delightful, so I'm very, very excited.
All right, and at a certain point in
time,
shows
that you can fool some of the people a lot of the time. Anyhow.
So Jana, at a certain point in time, we're going to have to stop doing the introduction. They're just going to know, I think. But for now,
it's true, but it's always fun.
All right, so
I might
Charles,
do something new. You don't know.
Yeah, you might. So before we get started talking about the Caine Riordan, is it Riordan or Riordan?
Riordan.
Yeah. We do have the religion questions. Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
All right, Space 1999, Battlestar Galactica, or Babylon 5?
The Expanse.
Okay. What is it about The Expanse that speaks to you?
One, if you like The Expanse, buy my books. You won't be disappointed. So I didn't throw it out there as a backdoor attempt to get a plug in, but it is. There's a thing that I think is one of. There are certain truisms in writing and writing instruction and learning to become a writer that you can take with a grain of salt. They apply sometimes, they don't others. But I will say that I have yet to find that this one is untrue. Writers tend to do their best work when they write what they love the most, which is very often what they read a lot of. And so for me, my love of The Expanse is a love of that kind of hard science fiction, of 2001 Space Odyssey, of The Martian. I mean, yes, they have their flaws and their blemishes, but the bottom line is those sorts of pieces of science fiction, the degree to which they vary from science is a quibble unless you work at JPL. Okay, so that's the kind of science fiction that I'm interested in. So that's why I nominate that. I would have to say though that the more recent Battlestar Galactica gets some pretty high points.
For me, I get that. I actually hard sci-fi is weird because sometimes it's navel gazing science textbook with a barely concealed plot, but when it's done right, it really pops. I really enjoyed The Martian. I thought it was well done. I haven't read the sequel. I know he wrote one. But The Martian itself, I thought it was fun. It was engaging, but he tried to keep the science at work.
Yep.
Although, didn't he crowdsource a lot of that on his website as he was writing it?
He did.
So that helped that he had access to all that expert, industry knowledge.
I take a page from Heinlein's book in whenever I can, but in this case, there's a lot of science, and this is not just Robert Heinlein. This was his editor, Burton Lassengame. If you take a look at his original texts, they were much more voluminous than they wound up being. But as a good editor, Burton knew how to cut the exposition and the description out of there. And apparently he got, the notion is you don't present a microwave and say, now let me describe to you the wondrous box that magically cooks our food. No, it's just the thing in your house, and when the story is pushed into all sorts of unlikely places just to be able to facilitate an in-dialogue description of something. We just need to know what it does. My attitude is, I think that if the science fiction author is doing her or his job, they are imparting a sense of groundedness and rigor through other things, almost, if you will, subconsciously, in what's the competence and the mastery of the material that's in the text itself. Basically conveys, I think, to a lot of readers, wow, this person does know what they're talking about, and you don't have to describe everything ad nauseum. As a matter of fact, in this, many people would consider this a sin of the first order. You don't even get any description of how the shift drive works in the Caine Riordan in the first book until 3/4 of the way through. And it's not done by somebody standing up in front of the room and saying, well, this does this and this does that, and as you know, Bob, and blah, blah, blah. It is actually a really socially maladroit engineer who's part of a diplomatic team who has had it up to here with the chief of the diplomatic team and is schooling that person to take them down a peg. And so it becomes a chess game. The information is a chess game, but and character conflict. But in the process of it, you learn how people are getting between the stars.
All I know about science when it comes to space engine is if you invert the polarity of the dilithium crystal, you can work miracles.
I've heard that. Yes, I've heard that.
All right.
Strange how that works.
So what about you, Jana? Which of the three would you pick, or would you substitute My Reality for something else?
Well, see, I'd have to look at it and go, the Sheridan years of Babylon 5, because I didn't care for the guy before, and then they went into a weird place after. And the first part of the new Battlestar Galactica, because it gets really weird there in the middle. And I liked the old Battlestar Galactica because the cheese factor was just tremendous, and that's part of what makes the new one work, is the places where they call back and you go, yep, that was cheesy then, it's cheesy now, but it works. So yeah. I want to pick and choose and meld them all together into a mind meld of great science.
Frankenstein your own story. I got you.
I get to do that.
One of the ships in the original Battlestar Galactica fleet had to have been the SS Velveeta. I mean, honestly.
Oh, absolutely. It was so cheesy. But it was a great thing to watch on a Saturday afternoon and know that it was cheesy and that it was fun and you were going to see spaceships and you were going to see hot guys. And so it worked for me at that age.
I liked all of them, but for me, Space 99 of the three, because I remember building that model of the spaceship with my dad. My stepdad and I built that when I was younger. And of course, when I was a kid, 1999 seemed so far away. So
that's because you're very young.
Jokes on us, I guess. All right, and because we're polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, Conan the Barbarian, Krull, or the Beastmaster?
Never seen Krull all the way. Beastmaster is that's Velveeta with a side of Swiss.
Yay, barely.
And I'm sitting here and I could. There are certain fantasies I've seen that might not even be characterized as fantasies, which would probably rise up. But of course, now I'm not thinking of any of them. So I by process of elimination, I have to go, I suppose, with Conan the Barbarian. But in general, and this may be heresy, I think that the Lord of the Rings films do a fine job. I know once again there's a lot of complaining about that, and I can understand why there's all that complaining about it. But once again, that's the number of people who are bothered by that is a tiny fragment, I think, of the ones who've experienced reading the works and then saw something come to light which may not have been exactly their vision, but boy, did it fit. And if it wasn't the same words, it sure did rhyme. And so, that's probably what I'd have picked.
We took took Tolkien off the list because it just wasn't fair to everyone else.
It's true.
That was some of our original questions. And I get people that are purists; they'll never be happy when it comes to adaptations. And we picked movies that were also books because it's that had been books because it makes it more relatable to all people who engage in speculative fiction across the board. But it, obviously we're not limited to one medium over the other. But I will say, Lord of the Rings, the book, set the bar for fantasy. Lord of the Rings, the movie, set the bar for fantasy TV. Because I couldn't watch The Rings of Power. I couldn't watch The Wheel of Time, the new show, and not compare them as like high school equivalents from a drama team after I watched Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings movies. Like after he set the bar and then to see us go backwards when technology makes doing good easier. I'm like, nope, you failed.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the Rings of Power one, where they went to one of the island kingdoms, like I could actually pause it and play Where's Waldo and find where they basically had like 12 actors and then they just kept superimposing them, but they didn't even make them outfits. They just kept them the same. I'm like, oh, it's Bob. There's Bob again. I mean, it was bad.
Oh, it was very sad. I agree.
All right, so since we've talked about your favorite dinosaurs in previous episodes, and if you want to know what he says, go watch those episodes. We're going to mix it up a little bit, and I'm going to ask you, what is your favorite zoo animal?
Coati.
Oh, what is that? I don't think I've heard of that one.
A coati is it. Some people call it a South American or Central American raccoon. It is a really interesting animal. It is, but unlike a raccoon, is generally they're domesticated as sort of house companions / pets, a variety of places from I think the Yucatan on down into South America. They have a barred ringtail. They have a fairly sharp nose. They're very inquisitive. Unlike, I thought for a long time they did have sort of the sort of digitigrade paws that the raccoon does, but they don't, alas. But that doesn't make me like them any less. Their tail is prehensile. They hang from trees by it, and so I'm a fan.
I dig it. I will find the wiki about this creature, and I will link it in the show notes so you too can be educated. Who knew a former teacher was going to teach us things? I'm shocked.
Strange how that works.
All right. Because we are civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, we are no longer knuckle dragging troglodytes. So I'm going to ask you, sir, coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
Usually coffee. I take it pretty much fully polluted. My real point of order on coffee is for whatever reason, my stomach and my taste buds like French press so much more than any other format. If I'm not doing that, I'll probably pass. It's not a snobbery sort of thing. I mean, I'll put just about any coffee in there. I mean, not Folgers maybe, just because, we all grew up with those impossible ads that haunt our dreams, perhaps, if we had anything better to dream about. But
it's the best part of waking up.
There you go.
I was going to say, is that not the best part of waking up? Yeah.
Okay. Slow pitch baseball for JR. Okay. Yeah, that was good. That was really good. I had that coming to me. So that's my coffee. That's my coffee confession. And if tea, it's Irish breakfast.
Okay. I just know that somebody sent me the video because I didn't believe it, but apparently one of the ones where the older brother comes back and he wants to talk to see the sister like for Christmas kind of thing. And he'd been on, I don't know if it was military or Salvation Army or whatever. And they're like, oh, this is clearly the I word where siblings like each other a little too much. I know it'll get blocked. And I'm like, no, it's just family that likes each other. What's wrong with you people? But
what are you talking? What is part of? I lost where this was shown.
So there's a Folgers commercial where a brother.
It is a Folgers commercial. Okay.
Where a brother comes back. I think he was Salvation Army or something to that effect. Where he comes back, he surprises his little sister on Christmas. He's clearly in his 20s. She looks to be about 13. And it's a cute moment between siblings that don't hate each other in a family that's functional. And so, of course, people on the internet ruin it. And there's whole conspiracies about the illicit nature of their relationship. And I didn't believe it. So one of our listeners sent me the breakdown of the video where they broke down the commercial. I'm like, these people need Jeebus. I don't know what's wrong with them, but they need something.
Well, they need to have grown up in a time perhaps when this was not a default assessment of everything.
Yes.
Right. We did not make those assumptions about anybody else.
I mean, they were things that happened, but
families allowed to like each other and it not be dirty. I'm just saying.
Well,
that's normal for most of us.
Prurient sells almost as much as blood. So there you go. Yeah.
Well, that's true.
Ain't that the truth?
So, in an attempt to get back into family-friendly territory, so one of the things that we brought you here was to talk about your Caine Riordan series, because it's a universe in addition to a series. So can you give us a summary of the universe real quick?
It's very big.
Mm-hmm.
That is
you want something a little more than that, right?
Please.
Yeah, okay. The inception of it is I actually the background for it is I took the CIA World Factbook plus almanac plus a State Department almanac and started tracking back in the 90s, and I started pushing forward, looking at GDP growth based on what's something called a Kondratiev cycle, which is, yes, it has its roots in Marxism, but what it basically says is GDPs will tend to go through cyclic boom bust. They'll generally range between 1% and 4%. Now, obviously, things have changed. I kind of anticipated a little of that too. And I projected out 100 years and some of the political things that I thought might happen along the way. That world is what the first novel, Fire with Fire, starts with actually the main character being looked at because he's been put into cold sleep. And the reason they did that is because he was in very much the wrong place at, unfortunately, exactly the wrong time. We don't realize exactly all of the details of that until the final pages of the book. But 13 years later, he is roused out of cold sleep to go and explore. He goes into that moment. There is no interstellar capability. We are, as far as we know, we're all alone in the universe. And our geopolitical scenario is, well, let's put it like this. I think that somebody from 100 years ago, you drop them in this day and age, they might be wowed by the technology, but actually a lot of it was sort of anticipated in certain ways. And there are still a lot of the same states in place. And you can, if you said, well, this is called this now because this happens, like, yeah, I can see that. So this, one of the reasons I chose this is because it's not near future, but it's not far future. So our present day is part of their very real historic. This is pretty much at the forefront of their historical mind as things are shaping up in the first years of the 2100s. And he is awakened because he's been off the grid for 13 years. And it turns out that they need him, catch all the things that have changed here. They need him to go to the planet Delta Pavonis 3, an actual planet around an actual yellow star. Well, we don't know that there's one right there, but we know that in other words, playing by all the rules, because there are reports unsubstantiated that there may be ancient ruins there. So this is basically how everything starts. He is not a super spy. He is not a super soldier. He is none of these things. He's not a trained diplomat. He has done. He was actually worked mostly as a defense journalist for the equivalent of Jane's, and his claim to fame. And he did some on-air journalism, which he did not like, and then basically he drops off the grid in 2105 and pops and comes back on, and they can put him on because no one knows who he is. He's been erased from the database. They give him cover identity. He goes out there, and to give you an idea of just how super secret this is, he gets off the shuttle at Delta Pavonis 3, and within 5 seconds, somebody's taking a pot shot at him, and his first thought is, what did they not understand about the word secret? So things change, things stay the same, and it unfolds from there. And the each book is either they have different centers of gravity in terms of subgenre. That book is very much political intrigue and first contact. It also has some very it has some combat action sequences in it, but they are not big scope. They're more on the level that you would expect in a political thriller, right? Maybe a hostage rescue or things like that. The next book is an invasion story, Invasion of Earth, as a matter of fact. The next one is, the third book is a deep contact story, and in some ways is one of my favorites. The one after that is straight up military science fiction, and the fifth would best be described as, what if you did the Adventures of Marco Polo meets Fall of the Roman Empire, decaying super alien edition.
This is the third book that we're talking about now.
That's the third book, Raising. And so the series has a lot of variation in terms of the themes and the different sorts of pots, I guess you could say, I play in for different books. But there are two things in each that are present in each one of these books. Each one has an independent arc and there's a problem, usually a mystery of some sort to be solved. But there's a larger overarching mystery which is introduced in the first book, because yes, there were ruins on Delta Pavonis 3, but there were 2 sets.
Oh.
And one of those sets was human. It's carbon dated for 20,000 plus years. What the heck was going on in our neck of the woods, in stellar cluster, so to speak?
And I've read the first one, and one of my favorite things is that, like I say, he's not a super soldier or anything like that, but he's such a great troubleshooter. And I think journalism kind of brings that out in you, where it's like you have been thrust into the thing. You got to figure it out, and you got to figure it out right now. And he does it in clever ways, but he's still so very human at it, where you go, you don't feel like I'm talking to somebody who is massively smarter than I am, but I am talking to somebody who's good at connecting with people, and he's good at looking at a thing and seeing through it and going, all right, here's choices A, B, and C, and I will choose the elusive choice X, which kind of has some bits of A, B, and C, but it all works together in a really, really great way. So I'm a fan of just the way that he thinks, because it works within the science fiction, but it is very much it's a journalist, it's a little bit of thriller. There's a lot going on there that make him a really great main character.
And just thank you, and that means that I've hit my target audience, because when I designed the character, one of the things I wanted was there are 2 places in the world where I feel very much at home, because they're minds forever voyaging. One has been, I don't know if it's still this way now, but I've had occasion to advise and consult for a bunch of different 3-letter agencies. One of them located in Langley. When you walk down all those cubicles, it is a parade of science fiction art and production stills and things like that. And the other place I feel like that is at a science fiction convention, where the bottom line is, you take and I don't mean this in the sense of IQ in terms of there's what I would call kind of static intelligence, and then there's the kind of intelligence of people who like, as they like the different, they like the new, they like the possibility of what will happen next. People have said, why do you write? And I said, because one of the reasons is because I've always wanted to know what's over the next hill in the biggest possible fashion of it. So when I made this character, I actually kind of made him a love letter to science fiction and fantasy readers, because that's how he thinks. He's called a polymath, but probably more than that. He's what I would call a paradigmatic thinker. There's an early phase, very first chapter, where he's been reanimated out of cold sleep, and somebody says, you show him a screwdriver, and he's going to see a weapon, he's going to see a tool, he's going to see a pendulum bob, he's going, etc. He'll see a straight edge. He is his perception of the universe. he does not receive objects or situations with accepted prior values. He has a tendency to see things and can strip away their context, and that gives him a lot of exactly the and I find that that's what science fiction and fantasy readers do. If they didn't do that, I don't think they'd love the genres.
So basically, he's MacGyver in space.
No.
No. Okay.
He's not.
There's a little more James Bond there, not quite as much MacGyver.
I mean, obviously, got the mullet, but you know.
Oh, rude.
What's that?
I said obviously you'd skip the mullet, but
oh, my goodness. This is really a sort of 80s TV episode here today, isn't it? I don't know if James Bond is the one I would think of either, but there are because you can't talk about James Bond, I think, without sort of borrowing in a sort of sense of a willingness to take life very lightly. There's a sort of hard edge to Bond, which is definitely not Caine Riordan. As a matter of fact, he has to fight. He has a hard time being as hard as he has to be a lot of the times in the course of these novels. But there's actually other individuals that I would think are a little more suited, but I guess you could say I didn't pattern him after anyone. I didn't say, I want him to be Bond. I want him to be Sherlock Holmes. I want him to be any of these other people. It's great that he rhymes with some of them, but it's also great that I can't find one say, oh, that's him.
Right.
So one of the things I noticed, and I don't see a lot of it, and I don't understand why, because the idea of cryo freeze is there. You see the cryogenics in a lot of science fiction, but the idea that sometimes someone will be frozen and forgotten about for years and then brought back, to me, is a fun trope that what's old is new again. I know Jack Campbell, or John Henry, as he's rebranded with his given name, did that with the Lost Fleet series. Obviously, you did it, but I don't think it gets done nearly enough, and it's such a powerful way to exposition of a universe.
Well, absolutely, it's a sleeper wakes moment. You know,
yes.
You have a character who's going to experience things that are as new to him as they are new to the reader, and that's an easy gimme. And in the case of the first novel, they pull somebody out who he doesn't know is essentially there to guard him and provide security. A young woman who was an army major, and she was one of the first ones ever put in because her liver was compromised, and she's been on ice a lot longer than he has. Also, just to go on that idea of, do I play by the rules? I have a book behind me here. In this book, Lost Signals, which of course looks reversed, but I can't do it. I don't have a mirror to be able to show it to you. But this wonderful art by Graham Gazzard on the cover, specific for the book.
That is great art.
In this, you guys probably know Rob Hampson, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Doc Hampson. So at any rate, he's in there, and I asked him to take us on a special task, which is, I had ideas about how cold sleep worked, and we sat down and we did I recorded it, a 4-hour session of what all of the details would be. And what he did in there, because I love to let people do what they do best and have fun with it. He writes an summary for the Oval Office from the highest levels of classification. Why? Because after the 4th book, more advanced cold cells have been located, and they have some very scary or uncertain things in them. But in the course of that, basically he's comparing it to the mechanism of the cold cells that you've been seeing, or cryocells that you've been seeing for the first 3 books. So all of those things, I could, believe me, if Rob didn't think it was possible, I wasn't going to do it. And so the stuff we have there is really based on, when you get down to it, there are all sorts of animals Arctic cod is probably a very well-known example. Why do they not freeze solid in the winter in the Arctic? They do. Why do they not die? Why don't they have the same cell death as we do? Because when the water starts changing temperature, the glycogenated aspects of the cytoplasm increase. So they basically are being slowly perfused with antifreeze.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it warms up, the process reverses. So taking that model and going into our genetic code, junk DNA, which I absolutely think is a we will only in the decades and centuries ahead will we understand just how much of a misnomer that was and perhaps how foolish we sounded. But these, they're already finding now in Neanderthals the idea that there was something very close to hibernation that they were doing. And the mere fact that bears are able to considering that a lobster DNA and our DNA is really extremely close. A bear, that's a kissing cousin. And somehow they've got something. Now, they don't do it exactly the same way. But what I'm saying is in our genetic makeup, to the extent that we have kept a lot of the DNA from our evolution, it's a matter of going in there, finding the right piece, bringing it out, using stem cells to create blood based on that, and then doing a slow diffusion into the target so that it gets time to get into the brain, across the brain, the brain barrier, all the rest, to keep that person alive and keep the temperature at 1 degree Celsius. So that's what you've got. That's the really quick version. And I know it's totally geeked out, and probably people have turned away here to go seek their closest stash of Velveeta. But this is when you are, callbacks, my thing. When you're going to do hard SF, I think this is kind of incumbent. I don't bring it out. You have to be an Uber fan, get the anthology, and find that particular thing to get the drill down on it. But all of the stuff in this universe has been thought out at that level.
I actually I don't go to mini cons. I don't do well with crowds, but I went to the last Honor Con, and Rob was there, and he was speaking on a panel, which almost nobody attended because I was there. They threw me on the panel because a bunch of people had went to watch David Weber talk, including one of the panelists. So him and I sat there, and we had a few people in the audience, and I remember them going on about that stuff. And he's like, "Man, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works." Because the argument was, "Oh, they can already do this. They're just keeping it because they don't want poor people to have medical technology." And I'm like, "Oh my goodness." So I've seen him speak when people get really dumb around him, and he's nice about it. He's the medical equivalent of bless your heart in the South.
Yes.
When it comes to giving his opinions on certain things.
Yes, absolutely.
So we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly show for the man. And then when we come back, we're going to dive right in, including showing that image in the pre-show, which is why I just bought the books. So.
Okay. Across 1,000 battlefields and 1,000,000 wars, there is always a question. What do you do when all the chips are on the table? Do you run? Try to find salvation in the arms of an easy peace? Or do you stand and fight and send your enemies into whatever hole they crawled out of? On Deadly Ground, a heroic Last Stand anthology, has 10 stories addressing that question. Each character faces the impossible in different ways, but all will be tested before the day is done. Can they earn a heroic victory amongst the endless eternity of space, or are they doomed to fall into obscurity?
Oh, man, I really love that cover. It started as a joke. Can you put Battlestar Galactica on the trench run with the Enterprise? And the artist gave me that. I was joking, and he took it as a personal challenge. He's like, if the true fans said hate mail, I'm sending them to you. I'm like, okay. Okay.
Hold my art beer.
Right.
Yes.
Jamie Glover had to go get a real job because him and his wife made babies, and they needed health insurance. You know how that goes.
Oh, that insurance stuff. Darn babies.
I know. I keep telling him, I'll send, I don't know, vitamin C or something so he can keep making art. But he did not take me up on the offer. But the art they got us that sold me on the book is you sent this to us. So do you want to give an explanation for people watching what this is? And then I will zoom in as you tell me to.
So going along with what I had said earlier about cold sleep and everything's got to work. people will right away probably look at this and say, what kind of cool looking spaceship is that? It's not cool at all. It's spindly. And well, that's right. Because when you get right down to it from an engineering standpoint, making smooth hulls is, they're basically, you're saying, okay, at some point we're going to interface with an atmosphere. That may be aerobraking, it may be entry, it may be something like that. However, when you get to really, really big things, they tend to break up when you try to bring them in as a single piece. What you're looking at in front of you, I think, is about 1.2, 1.5 kilometers in length. If you go at this is a shift carrier. This is how people get around the stars. This is actually one of the shift carriers that appears in the first book, called the Commonwealth. It is there are variations on the theme, but they all have more or less the same thing. It is difficult to get into this too far without getting into the physics, but suffice it to say, and if this isn't, I'm going to try to find a way to do this so no one is lost, because I got lost. A lot of
but
people,
it's so cool.
a lot of, so take a look at the big black donut. Okay, the big black donut is a shield. It is also essentially an energy recaption device, because two things are located behind it. What you can see at the back end is essentially an ignition fusion drive, which actually, when you get down to it, doesn't even wait on break-even fusion. Because when you can use lasers to hit hydrogen, usually deuterium, and cause it to essentially undergo a matter energy conversion, you will get a lot of thrust out of it. You will get not like 20 Gs, but the thing is that for the amount of fuel you carry, you can sustain maybe 0.5 Gs, 0.6 Gs for a very, very long time. And that is the first step in how this ship absolutely transits interstellar space. What you can't see behind there and just forward of that drive is what's called the Wasserman drive. The Wasserman drive is, for want of a better explanation, everybody, I think, is pretty going to be familiar with the idea that what makes a black hole is when something becomes so dense that it collapses into an area of, if you will, a little patch of time and space that can't hold it. So you get this is, by the way, every scientist out there is going to want to roll their eyes, and that's fine. But I'm not trying to please you. There's and that creates something that's called an event horizon. Look at black holes, you'll find all that. So the Wasserman drive takes a kernel of already super dense matter, and essentially puts it at the center of a compression field so intense that it is at the tip over point into, but it can't. So the amount of energy to create a sustaining wormhole or create an actual black hole is immense. However, to be sort of hovering near it is a very, very different question. And there's a lot of theories now about microscopic wormholes and microscopic black holes, and you could read David Brin's Earth, that's 20 years or more older now. I mean, the idea that we can play around with these things in different sizes so that they're not, essentially cosmic objects, that are greater than the mass of stars, and are seen and experienced on that level. This is happening in a very small kernel of matter at the time that the ship has achieved about 0.15 to 0.18 C, C being the speed of light. Why is that necessary? And one of the things is that if there's you may remember I was talking earlier, I think, about that moment where the person who actually is the son of the person who designed the Wasserman drive is sort of spanking a diplomat with that person's ignorance of the drive. And they think, like many others, that the idea is you need to go really quick so you can go through a wormhole. It's like, no, it's neither one of those things. The speed is not the purpose. When you go at significant fractions of the speed of light, what's called your energy, your rest state, your energy state is across the entire object is higher. Okay. What that means is that, therefore, when this momentary blip occurs, you are so close to your energy state is such that you can essentially get sucked in or go through it without being completely torn to pieces, because the change from a resting state like we're at right now, which is actually, well, that gets into relativity. We'll leave that aside. But this has a lot of energy pumped into it, a huge amount of energy, which means that all of its constituent atoms and subatomic particles are at this higher energy state, and therefore it is, best way to put it is, less of a shock to their system. So that what happens when the Wassermann generator creates that field effect, they do it in a place that, for lack of a better word of putting it, a better way of putting it, imagine string theory and quantum entanglement at the level of objects in the same stellar cluster. The notion here is so real quick again, quantum entanglement happens between objects that are already entangled, right? That's predominantly how it occurs. Well, what no one has really determined yet is how far back can that, if you will, imprint of entanglement go. Well, for the gases in a stellar cluster that put all the stars together, at some point they were probably all pretty well entangled with each other. So the bottom line is they use that. They find a way to actually to drop out of space here in the place where the Wassermann drive is activated, and it comes out at another place that it is quantum entangled with, and the ship doesn't go through as whole. It goes through essentially as a stream of subatomic particles and less. And it's string theory, if you're familiar with it, basically says if you take something from one place, you can and push it into whatever is taking it will appear in another place. That's how supposedly electron tunneling, quantum entanglement is explained. That the universe is keeping score. You are sending, if you will, the potentiality that will re-express at the other end of this link. And that is basically what's going on. A lot of heat is generated by those two drives. That's why that big black donut is there. All the little packets in front of it are cargo modules and other things. The cruciform, and I won't try to explain this because it would take too long, but it is call it a dual position rotational habitat. And what you see, all those little, if they look like lots of little bullets, those are not bullets, but they are all hab modules. And so rather than having to get people in and out and stopping, they can basically, what happens is, in the same way that the cargo modules are offloaded, rather than stopping and having everybody get to a boarding ramp and this, that, and the other thing, when you come to your destination, you're in your module, they take the module out, and then that's shipped down. So this simplifies things to some extent. The big fat donut on the front is an actual rotational habitat, which is where a lot of people spend a lot of their time when the ship is not under thrust. And I won't explain why that is. And you'll notice the funny shape on the very front of it. That is the command module, which is, a lot of people will be right in saying, oh, that thing up on the top, that's actually a sort of if you will, a protective sleeve for radio and other sensor arrays. And it is. But also, if you were to flip that image, and you can't, but if you were to flip it 90 degrees, you would see that it's essentially a saucer with a stabilizer tail. And that is in the event that of an emergency, that craft can operate separately from the craft. So everything here is absolutely purpose-built according to the science that they have unfolded at this particular time in 2110. And that's what you're looking at. And that's why when I say this is hard SF, yeah, it's as hard as I can make it.
And then, of course, you've got the support ships.
Oh.
Now, how big are the dock at the station? And then you've got the one way over here, which you can zoom
so you
in.
can zoom in on that one to see it. This is actually the book that this is the ship that shows up. It's a corvette. It's a warship. But here you'll notice now this is obviously designed for atmospheric entry, right? Delta shape, lifting surface, stabilizers. That's because it's small. And that's because when you have a big ship like that, making a ship that's a mile long that then has to go down to a planet, I don't know if most of the people who write those books understand what kind of engineering feat that would be. You want something that the tensile strength of being able to support that mass in midair as gravity is pulling at it at all points is pretty rugged. For a small craft, not so much. That's why the shuttle worked. You could make something 5 times the size of the shuttle and it'll probably be okay. This is and more potentially with certain if you have certain material advances. But this is I could even break down all the things you're seeing on that, but I won't. Just it's a cool shape. It's a cool ship. Carries about 24 people at max with hot bunking, and it shows up as a very, very significant part of the 4th novel, Caine's Mutiny.
Okay.
And thank you for
Yeah,
indulging me.
No,
That physics of it really. Oh, sorry, JR. Go ahead.
No, I was just say the thought process behind it was what sold me that this might be a book I would be interested in.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, and the physics of that, a really, really large ship popping into atmosphere, they do that since we talked about Battlestar Galactica earlier. There's the Adama maneuver, and they had physicists that were there for the show, and they gave them advice and everything, and they said, well, we have this idea. And their physicists said, from a physics point of view, that absolutely won't work. And they said, oh, so we shouldn't do it. And they went, no, you should totally do it because it will look awesome. Just know that it's completely and utterly unrealistic.
Right.
And that is one of the things that we engage with, I think, even sometimes in hard SF, is we go, we have done the research and we know that we shouldn't do this. The research says this shouldn't work. But the cool factor says that we might stick it in there anyway and just acknowledge that we know that it shouldn't work. But when the Battlestar drops in and all the ships fly out and they pop back out, sometimes you just got to do the cool thing. And if you can do both the cool thing and the science thing at the same time, yay!
And that's really what because, it is rightly said that trouble is an author's best friend, by which I mean transporters were necessary for economic reasons for Star Trek, because as probably everybody knows, in those days, those miniatures and those in-studio shots were phenomenally expensive. They consumed the budget alone that would normally go to like a standard procedural cop drama of that time. Just to get, and then it's like, well, we can't have the same sequence of the shuttle going down, the ship approaching the planet. What do we do? And lo and behold, the transporter is born. It's like, well, we don't have to worry about that anymore.
Glitter in a bottle.
Yeah, but I actually kind of like the difficulties in the same way that I like having to use the stars that we have in our own skies. Because Delta Pavonis is an actual star. All of the colony worlds, as a matter of fact, when you, JR, when you open the book that this sold you on, one of the first things you're going to see is by gosh, I've got it here. Why am I talking about something that I can show you? And it won't matter if this is upside down or backwards or any of those things. This is.
I've got you solo so you can show us
the stars.
Oh, cool.
Those are the actual distances accurate to Hipparcos 2, which hasn't changed a whole lot. And if you could reverse it, you would see that there are a lot of familiar names. Sol, where we're from, Barnard Star, Alpha Centauri, Ross 154, Epsilon, Indy, Tau Ceti. The ones in bold, that has a habitable, no, let's not put it that way. That has a planet with biogenic activity on it, which very often life in this universe is typically microbes.
Mm-hmm.
But one
Itty
of the
bitty.
mysteries, pardon me?
It's itty bitty.
It's
It's
itty
light,
bitty,
but
it's
it's
very
shiny.
primitive. But that's why when they find places which are almost shirt sleeve, they get really suspicious. And that has obvious connections to whatever those ruins were 20,000 years ago.
Cool. And so if you're listening to this only and you weren't watching the video and you don't want to pop over to a different device to watch the video, if you buy the book, it's in the print copy. So there you go.
This
You
one,
get a print copy.
yes, but not in the crazy detail. That there's no way to do what you just did. That's why I sent this to you, because it's. But this image is there. It will not blow up. That's an 8 megabyte PNG file, right? So
Wow.
do your math there. But not only is that image there in whatever detail it can be rendered, but also it's rotated in all views, and all the subcomponents, the hab modules, the command section, the small ship. All of the engine decks are all broken out, and they were why each one of them is shaped the way they are.
So is that something you commissioned or is a fan made?
This one, kind of the both. There is a wonderful artist in England by the name of Instead, who just started throwing out images of some of my ships, and I said, would you be interested in doing a pro job on that? And he said, well, do they serve pints at the pub? So, and so that led to this and all the other art that you will see. And since then, a lot of other people have done art for the series, which is kind of amazing. But I think for people who like, one of the things that I tried to put in the series is that it always has, it's science fiction, but I wanted it to be science fiction that had the sort of You Are There vibe of a techno thriller. I wanted, because I feel that at that level, you feel like you could actually be there. So one of the things I try to take out is, I try to leave in sense of wonder, but I try to take out the sense of constantly stubbing your toe into something that says, this world is not a world I could envision. It takes me a lot of work to project out of my current reality to see how this world could be. So I spend a lot of time trying to make sure that that is the case on the level of technology, relationship between nations, between species. I will not bore you. Well, I already have, but I will not bore you more with further details of just how far that work goes. But once again, one of the reasons we're talking about it here is because that detail doesn't show up in the books. I mean, the impacts of it do, but I don't reel it all out in this sort of detail because no one wants to read a textbook. But that's my job. My job is to have that kind of absolute, hard, as Mark Wandry says, this is not just hard science fiction, it's crunchy. And that's that's sort of the way I want it to feel. I want it to feel like a techno thriller that just happens to be 100 years in the future.
Okay. I actually dig this kind of stuff, but I'm also the weirdo that does read textbooks for fun. So maybe I'm
well, we were going to talk about that, but
so if you go to your website and all the other places, and I'll link all that in the show notes where you can buy this, it says in big bold letters that book one is like the third version of it. Did you change that because things in the known world have changed?
No. There was one of the weird things is I haven't. So bear in mind, I started working on this in the 90s.
That's why I asked.
I haven't had to change anything really.
Have any of your predictions come true that surprised you?
Well, all I'm going to say is, if you know the author Tom Doyle, you might, if you were to Google my name, Trial by Fire, and what was being auditioned in terms of drone warfare and ROVs, that book, and then what unfolded in Ukraine. He says he has a very short, very, very flattering, perhaps unduly so, almost certainly unduly so, draws that parallel, because in that war, I mean, we've been thinking about ROVs for a long time. We've been thinking about drones for a long time, but the way they could be used in a radically asymmetrical conflict, that they could be left sort of sitting on their own, undetectable. The way you can use them to fake out point defense fire control systems and things like this. That you're going to find all of that in Trial by Fire. I'm not saying I invented it, as I think you know from my bio. I've done an awful lot of work inside the Beltway in 3-letter and 5-letter agencies in intelligence and defense. But I was in this case, it's not so much that I went there and I got it. I think it's because I was writing that stuff and people knew I was writing that stuff that I got an invite. Nice. But that's a whole other story about how I got involved with something called Sigma, which is science fiction in the national interest. It's got a bunch of other unknowns in it, like, the late Jerry Purnell, Larry Niven, David Brin, etc. And we were asked to the important thing, I think, to bear in mind is, I think that trying to predict the future is a fool's game, because you're never going to get it right. You just can't. Ben Bova, who was a friend, also a member of Sigma, had a famous saying. He said, if you want to make sure that a technology absolutely does not occur, just write a science fiction story about it. That'll do it. But I think the idea of trying to project, right, which is to take the pieces, if you will, all the vectors, technological, social, otherwise, whichever you're playing with, and you don't just straight line analysis. That's what the bad futurists, I'm going to say, or at least the really unimaginative futurists, just essentially draw vectors from current trends forward and say, where does that take us? They're ignoring something. The future is not made by straight lines. It's made by currents and waves and curves impacting and influencing each other, and essentially ongoing developing mosaic that is evolving in an almost fractal pattern. And that's where the real challenge of projection is, because these lines are not going to go straight, simply because they're bumping into and interacting with each other. And so that's what I think, for me, that's been the science fiction that I've always found the most compelling and the most interesting. And that's what I do here. I have no illusions that that this future will happen. No, absolutely not. How could that be? But the idea is, I think it has one good projection has one utility. If you just even get in the ballpark, and I've seen this happen, it means people have already sort of thought a little bit about something new that's on the horizon, and there's that difference between the complete surprise, like getting hit in the face with a cold fish, versus oh yeah, I remember something a little like that. And that little difference can be huge in terms of being able to take your time, consider more variables, etc. One of the things that at Sigma was the most important was that we were not beholden to any organization. We worked pro bono. So we didn't have any dog in the fight. We weren't siloed up. And I actually think probably the greatest good we did was we could sit in a room and speak the truth as we saw it to a bunch of people who couldn't afford to do that, both because of they didn't know what they had in each other's shop floors, and they're fighting over rice bowls, in terms of what they're going to get from the public tills that come out of Congress. So all these things have informed me. It's been a real cyclic process. I mean, I got involved in Sigma in 2008, and so I've been doing that as much of this series has been written. But the first two novels were written, which was actually one long before I think they were completed in 2005.
I know sometimes, like I wrote a book where I actually predicted Brexit. And everyone's like, "How did you know that was going to happen?" Because it was written before Brexit happened. And I've tried to answer that as honestly. I'm like, well, if you watch the news when EU started telling, and we're not getting political, just use an example. When the EU started telling the Brits how they could fish their own waters, and you know anything about British history, you knew that wasn't going to last. Like, I mean, the writing was on the wall. I think sometimes you're not so much predicting as the future as you're just reading the tea leaves and making an educated guess.
Absolutely. Essential. Yeah.
And that's what they got on the I don't know if it's true or not, but the urban legend is they did that to Clancy and they asked who was feeding him lies. And he's like, I have a library card. I'm like, what do you want from me? When it comes to, guessing the details, because you can infer.
Yeah, I'll just nod.
Not and smile, boys. Not and smile.
There you go. Yep, calling back the penguins of Madagascar. There. Yep.
Right. Smile away, boys. Smile away. It doesn't need to be true. The sentiment is the same. That if you can read the information, a lot of it, you're just you're reading the tea leaves, right? Like you just got to know where to look for the leaves.
Yeah, as somebody has said about certain Clancy books, there was probably some DC bar talk in there somewhere. But that was probably not for the ones he's best known for. That was probably most true about Cardinal of the Kremlin.
By the time I was reading those books that everyone talks about, they were already like recent history, so they weren't it wasn't. The effect is different when you already know certain stuff's been declassified, right? Yeah, so I imagine though, for people reading it at the moment, that it's a different effect. I will say.
Absolutely. It is.
So, Jana, you had a question?
I do. I always have questions. So this one comes from the mom in me, and I think I already know the answer. But it's so much more fun when our guests give us the answer. Yeah. So since we do have parents and those who are trying to push science fiction and fantasy on our impressionable teens, if we were going to give the series a movie kind of rating, where does it fall? Where do we go? We're certainly not down at the G, but I'm very certain that we're not at the explicit either. So about where would you put it? What age to start reading?
The age issue has more to do with, I would say, Heinlein's juveniles. Most good juveniles before we had YAs were juveniles, and they are YAs because I'm not saying they're not sophisticated. They are. And in many ways, I think it's actually harder to write those books. Excuse me. I almost fall off the edge of the world.
Please don't fall off the chair.
Yeah. But because it's, as somebody once said, it's easier to write things very often when you have the freedom to use a more expansive vocabulary and knowledge base. And when you don't have those things, but you're still trying to tell an engaging, genuine story, that's harder. So I say that first to give context to what I'm going to say now, which is that I think I know 12 and 13-year-olds who've gotten totally into the series. I would say they are fairly advanced readers. And I know there's shout out a reader and a friend, Larry Southard, who says, one of the reasons I buy your books because I know I'm always going to find a word I've never encountered before. That's a
good reason to buy books.
Well, for some people, it's a good reason to avoid them, and I'll let you decide. I like to think that if that's the worst thing anybody feels after reading one of my books, that they had to look up a couple of words. If the rest of the ride was good, then can we meet in the middle there? I would say 12, 13 earliest. I would say it gets a lot more accessible for most readers. And I'm talking about, and reading has changed so much too. I mean, I have two 18-year-olds going off to college this fall within a month. And they're older. The siblings are they're born 2006. Their siblings 1999, 97. And between COVID and a variety of other things, I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying that reading, the amount of reading that is done, the focus on completing whole books rather than samplings, has created a very different readership. And I think also the nature of the narrative on demand. I mean, these little things we carry around with us all the time. We could read, if we could consume the equivalent of the Library of Alexandria for the rest of our lives every day, and we would not have exhausted that tube of plenty. As a matter of fact, I would easily suggest that more is being created new every day than was in the library at Alexandria. So given that, I think, and I know it sounds, I'm waffling because I think it really depends on the reader. There are people who are coming through the school systems right now who have the same sort of reading profile, I would say, but a lot aren't. So I think you need to know your readers. As a matter of fact, I would say if you have somebody who is interested in something more accessible, probably the most accessible of my things actually is what I wrote in John Ringo's universe, 2 books in the Black Tide Rising. They're thinner books. They're first person narratives. They are actually written from the viewpoints of people between the ages of 17 and 19. It is a survival tale. You don't need to have read. They are standalones. You don't need to know anything about what goes on in Black Tide Rising, his books, to be able to make sense of this. I definitely feel the mom in you. I have my own, and I do have that very much in mind. I have thought I would love to find a way and the time to reel it back in and actually write something that is more specifically for that is closer to a YA in this universe. But time, it just boils down to time, and actually I think I would love for it to be out there and for it to be able to reach those readers, but I think that the series has sort of put itself on the map in a certain way that if I'm writing in it, I think Tony Weisskopf, who's publishing it, basically wants, we know where the sweet spot of this market is, and YA is probably a little to the side of that. So
I will say
that makes perfect sense.
Not having gratuitous intimacy or violence on page is, for most people, like, oh, okay, well then it's okay-ish, because that seems to be the standard for most people at this point. You gave a lot more.
Yeah, there's nothing
for that at least. But I like that you broke it down by vocabulary and ability to engage in long form content, because you're right, that is something that is being lost, sadly.
I would say it's PG in the way that a lot of, not so much anymore, but if you go back and look at a lot of political thrillers of the 60s through the 90s, they did not feel the need to really get into that very much. Something that I think a movie I like for all of its flaws. If you're familiar with Ridley Scott, I think was the director for Black Rain, the movie with Michael Douglas set in Japan. There was sexual content, innuendo, suggestion, but there was nothing on the screen that would today even get beyond a PG. And even the language at that time would all fall well inside the PG realm. But that's a very, very adult film that I'm not sure how many 11 or 12-year-olds are sort of saying, what's going on? Why are these things happening? Why are these people so angry?
Absolutely. No, I've got a 12-year-old who her finishing, they give you those little reports as your kid goes out of school and this, that, and the other. And they're like, she reads and understands at a college level, but she's got the maturity of a 12-year-old. And so, yes, there are books that she could physically read the words and probably draw them together, but there's so much that just goes, zoom. And so that's a good thing to be able to say. A lot of this is know your your reader know the things that they love, but if they've got that expansive vocabulary and that interest, it might be a way to start directing them, especially as they get towards those 15,
yeah.
16, etc.
And I actually a lot of people from what I've have taken Fire with Fire, stuck it in a 15-year-old's hands and said, you're going to like this. And they're like, this is hard to read for like the first 4 or 5 pages. But it's not because they've not seen the words before. It's because, quite frankly, I think we're shooting at very often our educational system is not it's aiming at safer targets in terms of what it's able to accomplish, which is make of that what you will. But
that was very diplomatic. I'm impressed.
Pardon me?
Yeah, that was nice.
One of the authenticity of the diplomacy scenes. While I've never been a diplomat, I had 5 Fulbrights, and I've been in a lot of embassy parties. And I'll tell you, that's a battlefield all unto itself. And so if it sounds like there's some personal experience there, yeah, there is. So tactful, it comes in handy sometimes. Yes.
All right. So as we wrap this up, was there anything that you think people need to know about this universe that we haven't talked about? I think we've kind of outlined what the universe is, and anything more, it feels like might be spoilers. But
first of all, one of the things that I try to do is it does have aliens, although they're called exosapiens. Yes, the ones that at least are discovered in the first book are all capable of breathing the same air we are. They do not. Only some of them can eat anything vaguely like our food. However, that's not because I'm taking an easy path. All I'm going to say is that has a lot to do with what was going on 20,000 years before. Why are some planets so hospitable and why are they not? And if none of these were the races which actually had a prior spacefaring history, who was doing what? And is this, in fact, but happenstance or by design? So the aliens themselves are as, how can I put this? If somebody for some reason had a desire to produce certain sorts of planets, let us say, and looked at species almost as different tools, right? They'd have to be in many ways similar enough. They could at least communicate, that they would recognize each other as life forms. And that probably, unless for some reason you wanted some to be banished to certain worlds, that they would have roughly the same sort of survival requirements. But one of the things that people have called out in this from the very first time this was, the first novel did not get reviewed by Publishers Weekly, but the second and the third got stars. And the thing that they called out was the authenticity they felt of the aliens, that they really are alien, despite the fact that they have these similarities. One of the things you see, I think, in a lot of space opera is that you get race X, and they seem to be a monolith. You know,
yes.
It's not, they don't have a lot of, they don't have all the complexities we have. Now, there may be certain species in which that might be the case, but then you need to play with that all the way through, and you need to go down the line as far as why would that be? That's engineering, just like the ship you're seeing on your screen here. It's that also is rigor. So the aliens, who are in many ways some of the most, people told me, some of the most memorable characters, are not human at all in this. About the human characters, a lot to love, I believe. One of the other things, there are issues of good and bad, and understanding what we see at any given moment in time tend to keep unfolding like you're peeling back the layers of an onion. Don't don't be too hasty to assign moral values or think you know what's going on until you see a little bit more. And that's one of the things that I like to hope is one of the things that pulls people into the story, because in the same way that 40 what happened 20,000 years ago is an overarching mystery that's getting solved, this idea of learning more about the species and how they interact and who really did what for what reason keeps on evolving with the series, which people have really, for people who like that, they seem to have. That's one of the things in which also I think it's very much like The Expanse. The Expanse very much capitalizes on very much that same sort of dynamic of folding back the onion. I would also say that if you like it, if you like adventure, if you which isn't always, that is not a synonym for combat. That is not always the most important form of adventure at all. As a matter of fact, in the 5th, it barely shows up at all. But there's a lot of risking of life and limb. And if you like questions that might have, let's say, shed a light on contemporary issues, in the 5th novel, there's something called Ur Virtua. And one of the problems with Ur Virtua is that the species which is using that, they can't find enough people willing to get involved in real things anymore to keep things running. And they are running out of time. So, so not exactly ripped from the day's headline, but certainly in some ways informed by some of the concerns I think we see bubbling up in our own culture. Lastly, I will say that while they're all available in ebook, all formats, and in usually it's trade and mass market, or now it's hardcover and trade. Also, audiobooks exist for the first 5. And just today, the 6th book out of the 7 in the main series has dropped. So audio, for anybody out there who's saying, when are we going to get new audiobooks? Guess what? They're here, or they're coming. One is here, one is coming. I should also say there's a whole other part of this universe that has nothing to do, well, it is tangentially related at first to what is going on in this main arc. You've heard me talk about the fourth book a bunch of times. And in that's the military science fiction book. Our heroes come across people who were apparently taken from Earth between the middle of the 1930s and the first years of the 2000s. And they were not obviously taken by us. I'm not going to say who they were taken by. They're in cold cells. And they wind up being called the Lost Soldiers, because all of them they're historically, again, what sort of research I do, I did not keep the names, but they are all individuals who were missing in action in various conflicts.
Oh, sweet.
And it is they are drawn directly from that, right down to were they MACV-SOG in Vietnam, were they medical personnel in the siege of Sevastopol in World War II? All these people who went missing, that is the Lost Soldiers. I populated them with those stories. To make a long story short, other people. That was the sandbox where I got other people to come and play with me, and you'll know a lot of these names. Chris Kennedy was the first one to publish Lost Soldiers. Then Tony came along and said, I like that too. So Chris Kennedy's in it, Mark Wandry, Kevin Eikenberry, Griffin Barber, Casey Ezell. I'm worried I'm going to forget somebody here. Mike Massa. And then we had more people jump in for the later ones. William Allen Webb came in, and then I don't think I'm leaving anybody out at that point. But we've had those folks have come in, and in the same way that anthology that I pointed to, there is a broader world. The Lost Soldiers, by the way, are not a throwaway side arc. They are different in that I invited all of those people to write characters whose expertise were their own. So Mike Massa writes a SEAL, who was one of the Lost Soldiers. Chris Kennedy writes a fighter jock from who works off of aircraft carriers. Griffin Barber writes somebody who is essentially he's a policeman in San Francisco, and he wrote a criminal investigator. It's Casey Zell, chopper pilot. All of those folks, I asked them to write a character that actually they would be able to use their personal experience and expertise in. And I'll tell you just one funny story, because you're being very generous letting me sort of go on, but I wanted to give you an idea of the breadth of it. So after the first 2 books came out in the Lost Soldier series, there was a review on Amazon. Yeah, already we know this is not going anyplace good. It's obvious that none of these people ever got near a uniform. So we did the math and we said, actually, when you add it all together, there's more than 150 years of collective service. So
Sweet.
no, not quite. But we had fun. It's a different vibe. It's a little bit, as I've described it to other people, the quick takeaway. If you like the idea of, imagine Band of Brothers and Kelly's Heroes blended together, you will like the Lost Soldiers part of this universe.
I am not
sweet.
surprised they said that. One of the authors I write, he's written in The Galaxy's Edge, John Spears, he writes as Doc Spears, was a Green Beret. He wrote the Special Forces Unit books for the Galaxy's Edge universe. And one of the critiques of book 1 is it's clear this guy has never operated. Now, mind you, he's a plank owner on I don't know if they use that term, but he's one of the founders of the U.S. Army sniper school that the Rangers go to. Like, the dude knows his stuff. And so you realize some people will never be happy when it comes to those reviews.
And clearly are very impressed with their own depth of knowledge. So much that they show it for all of us. And now it's on the interweb forever, and they can't avoid it anymore.
So other than the Lost Soldiers in the main series and that one anthology, are there other books in this world already, or are more coming?
Well, more are coming. As a matter of fact, what I was working on today was that. So I do like collaborating with people. So I reached out to a fairly obscure author who does really good work, who's writing 2 books with me in this. You might have heard of him. His name's David Weber.
That obscure author.
Yeah.
One of these days he's going to make it big. I just know it.
Yeah, he's going to make himself into something.
I got that feeling too. But we're doing 2 novels, which actually they derive out of the 5th novel in the series, where actually Caine Riordan's son is determined to be part of that group of individuals that make sure that Earth is never invaded again. He's the person actually that David Weber is writing. I'm writing a different character that I cannot share the identity of, because it is going to be, I think, one of the biggest surprises in the entire series. And it is fraught with all sorts of long-term and short-term consequences. But the first one is covers their 2nd and 3rd class years at the academy. They are part of a new group, which is actually being put more in the field, because given what happened to Earth, there's this desire to get people who are already a little bit seasoned, but also the desire, because it's like every prior conflict we've had, we've known the history of our adversaries. We've known what they've done, they're coming from, even if their military traditions and their economic models are very different than ours. We know it. We are dealing, and we may encounter without any prior warning, although at this point we seem to have met all the aliens there are. Haha. Once we recognize. But they're saying this is more like when the Brits would send, it's Master and Commander, except for in the Fiji Islands. You don't know what you're going to run into. You need somebody who is not learning all of the naval part of the job on the fly, and having to be essentially diplomat, merchant, minister plenipotentiary, et cetera, because that was when you are operating in an environment so unknown and so incompletely charted, both geographically and culturally and socially, you need a very, very different skill set than what you've been able to evolve for strict military engagement in known environments. So that's the first novel, and that one is called Misbegotten. Read it to find out why. And the second one is called Forsworn, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But keep your eye on that up-and-coming David Weber guy.
I will say that it is not unheard of to do what you're talking about at the Academy. They used to send them out on ships of the line while at the Academy as their rank of midshipmen. So going back to that, actually in the Age of Space makes sense again.
Yep.
So Jana, you had a wrap-up question before we bring this puppy home.
I do have a wrap-up question. I love this question because when I've been a guest, JR keeps using it on me, and it makes me think really, really hard. And then usually it makes me admit that I am getting older and I'm not in the shape that I used to be, because in my fantastical world, he always says, well, do you want to go live in that world? And I'm thinking sword and sorcery and having to run far away. And I don't do any of those things anymore. But this is a little different because now we're going forward into science fiction. So what do you think, Chuck? If you had the opportunity, would you want to go and live in the Caine Riordan world, or is this something that you just like to imagine about?
No, I would absolutely. This goes to this idea of we write what we love best, and this is, while I love all the things that I write, this is there's a reason that I am putting so much of my effort in this one thing, because it is a place that I like to spend time. It is also a vision of, I think, it asks questions. You're getting more than you asked for, but
No.
So here's why I want to live in this, and here's why I actually decided to write this, among other things that I could have written, and that is, so think of the branching possibilities ahead of us as a species. Okay, either we don't get off this planet in any sort of meaningful duration or sustainable method, or we do. So if we don't, I don't need to write about that. So we do. Now the question is, can we actually then spread out in the solar system and make a sort of become a true spacefaring living society? We either can or we can't. If we can, okay, fine. That's an important thing to write about, because lots of books have been written about the other two things. Now, if we can get into another stellar system, that's another question. And the last one is, are we alone? Now, I wanted to write the one as seriously as I could in a techno-thriller vibe about what if we're not alone. And for me, the greatest interest in what's going on there is if that is what we live in, and there'd be all sorts of ways that could be, and we wouldn't know it. Fermi's paradox, where is it? Well, what if civilizations only pop up every 50,000 years and usually snuff themselves out? There's all. Yeah. So the question is, if that's a thing, if that actually is a thing, I wanted to write something that dealt with real humans that have real concerns that we can recognize, dealing with recognizable intelligences, but that are not us, and all the sort of challenges and opportunities those might present, as both a sort of love letter to the future and a cautionary tale. So that's why I write what I write, and that's why I'd like to live there, because, like I said, I'm the guy who wants to know what's over the next hill. That's the ultimate next hill.
Okay.
I love it. I'm coming too. I think I could survive there.
Let's see you there. Let me know when you arrive.
This is the part of the interview, dear listener. I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So do your part. It really does make a difference. And with that, Chuck, where can listeners and viewers at home find you on the Wild Interwebs? And we'll link it all in the show notes.
The Wild Interwebs, the best place to find me. Alas, I say alas because I hoped it was going to be Patreon, but instead it is still Facebook, where there's a group page, which is at 1,400 now, I think. I don't know. And that is, by the way, actually, it was put together by the fans. It's run by the fans. It's moderated by the fans. There are only 2 rules: no politics, and be cordial and civil. And I've never had to use a band hammer, ever. So it's a little bit of an oasis about people who like science fiction and take it a little seriously. But we also have somebody on there, 2 people on there who are great at finding Gary Larson cartoons of aliens and stuff like that, which are perfect in a lot of cases. And so you can find me there. You can find me on Patreon. I could do a whole show on that. There is exclusive fiction content about 12,000 words a month that you won't see anyplace else on my Patreon page. 2 of those are actually set in the Caine Riordan universe. And you can find me on my webpage. It's really hard to remember, www.charlesegannon.com. And
Hard one.
Yeah, tough, very tough. And let's see, I don't do Twitter very much, to put it lightly. And I think that those are probably the best places to find me when you get right down to it.
Okay. I have all of that linked in the show notes, and Jana's links will be in the show notes, but we are up on time, so I don't want to spend forever. She's on the face space, and she's on all the places, and the links will be in the show notes.
I'm on all the things. I'm a bad hider.
And you can find us on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree / Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumble, the YouTube, the TikToks, the Twitters. We've got our Spotify, our Discord, our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. For professional purposes only, people. Save the shenanigans from Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, the Twitter, and the email. We will have her on again for proof of life. I promise the Garbers are alive. They're just being overworked by Uncle Sam. And with that, you can support the show.
So you say.
I mean, we'll have to have proof of life to prove that, but these episodes aren't free to produce, and we appreciate your patronage. You can support the show by going to buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section this for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee till they swim away on a river of Java goodness. They will drink so much that they will see the stars and build their own spaceships just on the coffee brand coffee energy. You want some of that in your cup. Links in the show notes, discount code podcast grunts. You get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. And with that, I would like to thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom.
Thanks for having me on.
This was a lot of fun. And
yes, delightful.
We'll have to have you on for other episodes because you're always fun to talk to.
Great to come back.